Hi, and welcome back to the Thinking About series for this academic year. I would also at this point like to say a huge welcome back to all our students into the classroom. One of the great things to come out of lockdown, however, was this Thinking About series when all of our friends and schools of the Southwark Schools Learning Partnership could get together and listen to some superb speakers from a range of disciplines. So today, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you the artist Clare Twomey. Clare is a leading ceramicist and an installation artist, as well as a research fellow at the University of Westminster. Over the last 10 years, she has exhibited in the V&A, the Tate, the Crafts Council, the Museum of Modern Art in Japan, the Eden Project, and the Royal Academy of Arts. Clare is really interested in the making process and our relationship with objects. She also, peculiarly, relies a lot on audience participation. So over the years, I have not only walked over her work and destroyed it, I've also taken away loads of really beautiful objects from her site-specific installations. I have a beautiful collection of Wedgwood blue birds that came from her exhibition at the V&A in 2006, when that night, over about 4 hours, 4,000 birds were taken away from the cascords. And it was, in a way, really quite sad to see such a magical exhibition disappear in just 4 hours. I also became a factory worker at the Tate in 2018. When I clocked in, got into an assembly line, and made some tableware, and for exchange for my labor, I got this beautiful object. Also, on Westminster Bridge in 2016, along with a group of Dulwich College students, we were given these beautiful, gorgeous white porcelain spoons from our project, Humanity in Our Hands. I think about a year previously, on the same bridge, Clare invited thousands of people to give their thoughts on the question, if humanity is in our hands, it needs. And then all those responses were then handwritten on these beautiful spoons and given out on Holocaust Memorial Day. My spoon says, if humanity is in our hands, it needs courage. And I think, considering everything that's going on around us, that is really poignant. Clare's role as an artist really does make us think, makes us connect to each other. It reminds us what it is to be human and to have empathy. And that is something that we all read right now. Her work, I think, has so much heart. At the end of Clare's talk, I'm gladly going to hand over to our two student panelists. We have Anna Elizabeth from St. Saviour's in St. Olives, and we have Sam right here at Dulwich College. So what we'd like from you is to just pop your questions into the Q&A button on the Zoom control panel at the bottom of the panel, and they'll pose the questions to Clare for you. So that's it for me. And now I'm delighted to introduce Clare Twomey, who will be thinking about making in a material world.
A huge thank you to the team at Dulwich for inviting me, but also all the other teams across our educational guests today. It's incredibly hard work for you to connect everyone. So I really appreciate how you were doing that today, and looking forward to what we might be able to talk about. But I'm going to start, as Mary Jo suggested, with some of the work that I've made. And the work I'm going to show you is all bound in relationship to not just the material of clay, but how that works with audiences, how it works with museums, and how it connects to us. And I think most importantly, clay is this incredible material. Out of all the artists you're going to hear speak in this series, I have to be an advocate for clay because it is such a familiar material. You may not be able to do it in your school. You may not have done it at primary school, but it's something we connect with, from our cups to our houses, to our bathrooms. It's something that's around us. And so there's a great familiarity that really helps the work that I do, because it allows people to access art immediately and with a familiar sense of knowing. So let me continue. Today, I'm not in my studio, I'm at home. But I wanted to show you a little bit of the studio, a little bit of making. And this particular film you're seeing here is of a project that's just about to launch at the beginning of October. And it's a project that's actually been running for about 2 years-ish, for the Royal Orthopaedic Hospital. And this work that we're making was working in collaboration with Here Design, who are an amazing design company. So I just thought that it would be quite useful for you to see a little bit of the making. And then here on the next slide, I've got a little tour of my studio, which we're not in today, but I think it's really helpful to see an artist studio. What is that? What does it look like? Well, it's a bit like your bedrooms. Everybody's is individual. There is no such thing as an artist studio looks like this. This is how my artist studio looks. And sometimes I'm here alone. Sometimes I'm here with 15 people. Not at the moment though. We had a film crew in a couple of weeks ago and there was 3 of us all masked up. My studio is at the Thames Barrier and it's an incredible site with 400 artist studios there. It's an amazing place to work. And I've been there for about 4 years. And here you can see some of those little buttercups which are in development. So it kind of shows you, I'm going to show you a lot of finished work. This is some of the things it takes to make a piece of work. It takes a lot of failures, intentional failures. And here, over here, I think you'd love seeing this. This is the storage for 2,000 buttercups and they're just in boxes from the supermarket. So artists do lots of different things. And here you can see they're all piled up. And I'm quite excited about undoing the myths of our materials as well, like clay is this fragile thing, but actually you can do an awful lot of things with it that can challenge that. So this is the way I'll deliver the work to the design group and they're going to package it and put it in beautiful, beautiful boxes. So in my studio, you see these beautiful big red vases. They were part of a project that has been shown in the States, in this country, and also in Norway. This is a large section of drawing that I've put over in the studio at the moment because I'm trying to work out some new ideas. So I'm doing that on paper with a pencil. And this is my kiln. It's fired over 10,000 objects in its lifetime and it just keeps going. These are the kiln shells, more of the buttercups on. And now this little project is a great one. This is what I'm doing for the Art Fund that is connected to the saving of Derek Jarman, the filmmaker's beautiful house. And then this is my desk. It's got normal things on it, like a computer and a bottle of water. And then these are a huge amount of words and meanings we put together for the Tate. And this is the view out of my window in my studio. And that's a coffee grinders opposite where I work. And then there's a climbing wall near me as well. And so this is my view of the studio. Lots of potential, which I think is really important. It's one of the things I've tried to do in the work that I make is trying to keep the potential of what I can do open. And Mary Jo talked a little bit about how the work I've made has asked the audience to become more involved. And this was really one of the very first pieces of work I made. It's consciousness, conscience. And in this... So this piece of work was made over 20 years ago. And over 20 years ago, the gallery, the museum was a very different place. We didn't interact so much. And so for me, this piece of work, which is consciousness, conscience, is so much about what we're prepared to do to maybe experience things. So it was ultimately about care and destruction. And they are themes that have run through my work, a great deal of understanding how do we care, who do we care with, and who do we invite in. Now, I'm trying to interject this talk with things from another world. So this lovely film is how your plates at home, the ones you eat off, this is how they're glazed. This is fantastic, isn't it? I saw this when maybe I was about 21 years old when I was at university, and seeing this transformed my world. And I had no idea at the time. I held on this in the back of my brain for about 10 years. So also, sometimes it takes a really long time to make work. But eventually, where this film was taken, which is at Wedgwood, I made what turned out to me to be a really important piece of work, and it's called Trophy. And Trophy was made for the Victoria and Albert Museum, and it's the first piece of work that they'd had in their galleries that included the audience in terms of participation. And so these little bluebirds you can see, Wedgwood helped me make them, and there were 4,000 of them set up in the cast courts. And at this time, we didn't have something called participation. There were no words for it. And so the V&A opened up their doors and allowed the public to come in. And the public followed the public, and they took all of the birds in 5 hours. It was an overwhelming experience for the public because this opportunity had not been afforded them to steal a little bit of Wedgwood from the V&A. I would recommend not doing it tomorrow. But through this piece of work, as an artist, I understood really how much the public valued and understood some of the things I was starting to discover about clay. That Wedgwood is an iconic material in this country. It doesn't translate all over the world. This is a really super local conversation. And it's what we're doing now. We're having many super local conversations. And that's one of the things that I'm going to quote Mary Jo on again, how important the moment of now is, how we understand that. So from the point where we can be inside a museum and we can take things and we can take those away and we can value them, then when I was invited by the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, which is a trust that's run by the government and funded by the government, and the Queen is the patron, or was the patron, now it's Prince Charles. They invited me, along with wonderful people like Anish Kapoor and many other artists, to make a response to that year's theme of really understanding how human the issues of genocide and Holocaust are. So I made a project, which Mary Jo showed already, which is fantastic, of these spoons. And we made every single one of the 2,000 spoons by hand in the studio. And so the making of things is really important. So here we have a box, and inside that, it's very nice because on my spoon, which I'm showing you now, it says, if humanity is in our hands, it needs equality. And of course, that's very relevant now as well. But the making of these spoons is important because they're made of porcelain. And if we understand this project ran from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. on Westminster Bridge, then we understand that if we drop this spoon, it will break, it will shatter. So there's a sense of materiality that I want to keep referring to, the things we understand about clay, that if you drop it, it might break. These definitely would, because they were kind of long and fragile. But I do believe as we handed the spoons out to people who were prepared to take them on Westminster Bridge, that they understood that invitation. And we didn't ask them for anything. There was a skepticism almost about, well, why would I want this? What do I do with this? And I think that's one of the joys of the projects that I make, is that we often confront publics and offer them warmth and the possibility to be more involved. So when we ask the question, humanity is in our hands, what does it need? It was very welcomed by all these publics in 2016 on Westminster Bridge. I hope that the spoons now are living their life, much as Mary Jo has shown, in people's houses. It's really important to understand that when we gifted these, we didn't ask for names, we didn't ask for comments, we just gave with a huge amount of trust. And I believe that that trust still lives with those people. And often we can think of how big is the project? How many people does it affect? I'd like to think for everybody who picked up one of these spoons, they took it home and maybe they talked about it. And so in a way, the cause for the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust was to let more people know that it's a possibility, and we should do our very best as humans with humanity to try and prevent it. So to be invited into a project like that, it was a joy to bring this beautiful porcelain, but it was also a joy to bring lots of people with me on that project. I'm taking you quickly now to York, and this is another group of amazing people. And I've been invited to make a response to the beautiful collection of ceramics at York. And what I really wanted to talk about was skill. When you look at this collection, it's handmade, so beautiful, and it's loved, really loved by the 3 collectors who donated it to the museum. So what I wanted to do was make that live. I wanted to give it more accessibility. So we went across the country and we made 10,000 bowls by hand with lots of amazing people. And we made 10,000 bowls because somebody like Roger Kneebone or many other philosophers will say that it takes 10,000 hours to become a master. So I'm hoping that many of you are on your way to mastering some of the things that you love. This is a little film of us installing that work. And if you watch the museum cases on the left, magically about halfway through, they fill up with the collection I've been talking about, the inspiration from making this work. But one of the important reasons I'm showing you this, it's really important to be ambitious. So we think about clay and we think about objects, maybe this size, a small cup. You think, oh yeah, that's what clay is. But actually it's really important that you think ambitiously and you think with your generation and understand, what does the material mean now? What does it mean in our world? And this is what it meant for me. This huge towering force of a monument that was made to the 10,000 hours of making was really about trying to sum it up for the visitors in a really simple way. There are 10,000 bowls made by 10,000 people. And this is actually what that looks like when you stack it up. I don't know if you can see that, but the collection has now miraculously appeared in those beautiful cases. And it is one of the joys that I have as an artist of being invited in to see a museum, often when it's being reformed in some way. It's a good opportunity to let an artist in and allow them to add voice to your collection in some way. So this is the final sculpture. And you may have seen in the video in my studio, there's a few of these in the studio as well. So that communication and those tools of communication, you can see here in this piece of work I made for the William Morris Gallery. And here, the performative aspect was we invited 70 apprentices to come and work in the museum in a workshop that I'd set up. So this workshop you can see here, we have a master painter, and that is Floor, and she's in the blue shirt. And then we have a volunteer from the public, and they're learning for one day to become a master painter. And in this little film here, you can see that the tiles are starting to move around. And this piece of work was 4 meters by 5 meters. So a very, very large panel that we made in ceramics. And the original drawing is, I profess, an unfinished sketch by William Morris. The William Morris said it was a fully finished sketch. But for me, part of the attraction for me working with this sketch, which was for a wallpaper, was the fact that the end was incomplete. And so my project, which ran over 70 days with the apprentices, completed what we can see now as a contemporary dialogue around the craft and skill of William Morris. And his great aim was to make beautiful objects more accessible for the public. And if you go to John Lewis, you can still buy his prints today, and they're still changing the fabrics and making them contemporary. So in a way, when we're talking about material and we're talking about craftsmanship, then the diversity of my work means that I re-examine my thoughts about that constantly as an artist, but also it allows the public, when they engage with these works, to find something that is relevant to them. And this is another example of that. This is in the home of Asger Jorn, the incredible futurist painter. And this is in Denmark, in a place called Silkeborg. And I was invited to make a piece of work there. And in the background, you can see some sketches of his original drawings. And in the front, I placed 60 of those, and the numbers can get muddled up. And the public came and they made a creative response to his sketches. Because Asger Jorn, in his history, had a weekend in Silkeborg in Denmark, where he encouraged the public to come and work with him to feel free and be creative. And so I invited the public to do the same. But this vase, of course, is a very particular vase. It's made by Kayla. It's a very common vase. It's a very normal vase. It wouldn't be a vase that's terribly high-end, like the wedge woodwork, but it's not IKEA. So it's somewhere in between. So it's kind of maybe something of value. If a family has it in their home, they value it greatly. So the public came and they worked with marker pens and they drew the little black lines. And then I trained a master painter in Denmark and they repainted that in gold. And that was done over 60 times to create a monument to Asger Jorn's call for us to be free and creative. To move away from clay slightly, because I think it's important to say that when the Parsonage Museum, which was obviously holds and hosts the history of the Bronte sisters and brother and father and family, invited me to make a work, I didn't find a way that I could make a clay work. It somehow didn't make sense, but I did make another work. And so I think it's useful for you to know that in terms of material, I question it constantly. And what we found at the Bronte Museum, that there was actually a missing piece of material, and that was the handwritten script, the handwritten manuscript for Wuthering Heights. It's the only one that's missing, the only one without the Bronte's writing upon it. So what we did over 1 year, we rewrote all 10,000 sentences written in that book. And here you can see at the top is what we could get as near as to the original version of the book. And if you have a literary interest, then there'd be many, many edits and versions of the book. This is the one Charlotte edited after Emily had died, because there were too many grammatical mistakes in the original, which I think is quite lovely to know that we all have faults as well as huge achievements. So in this book, there are many transgressions, and one of them is to write in a museum. It's a very unusual thing to do inside the heart of this small museum, but also to score out the lines in a typed book is that proved to be a huge barrier for lots of people. And here you can see the variety of handwriting that we have. And the whole book was completed. And it was a huge joy that it's now part of the Bronte collection. From doing this project originally, this has now gone in to be part of their archive and their collection, which is a huge achievement, not only for me as an invited artist, but also because the public's words are held here. And also there's a participation book, so everybody's name is also held in that collection. So now I'm going to whiz through just one more project, and this is the project I undertook at the Tate. And that little video clip was one of the things that I saw when I visited Dudson's, one of our brilliant British manufacturers of ceramics. And I've had a real privilege to be able to go in to the manufacturing process and see it. And there, it's really interesting when that little pen with a bolt on the end of it was rattling against the cup. It was to check that the ceramics was whole. So if it rings like a bell, it means there are no cracks in it. And it's these kinds of knowledges, these really secret material knowledges that are buried deep in industry and often held in people's oral histories that don't arrive within the public realm. And so I'm quite interested in that. But here, the film you can see now is the factory that I made at the Tate Modern. I think that's 2 or 3 years ago now, 2 years. And we turned the Tate Modern into a working factory. And to do that, we invited the public to come and join our workforce. So in this short film, you can see lots of people with the factory t-shirts on, and they were our factory workers. And they invited the public to come and work with us, not in a workshop, but to actually undertake labour. And while they were undertaking that labour, they had conversations with everybody from my team about skill, about how they'd learn skill, what they do with material. And so for their labour, they of course got paid, as everybody should. And so the beautiful little jug that Mary Jo held up for you at the beginning of this introduction, people were paid in objects. So whether they mopped the floor, or whether they made a flower, or whether they made cups and saucers, they all got paid for their labour, and they took that object home with them. Here is the 8 tons of clay we brought from British industry, which was exciting, and it lasted for the project. And here I just want to show you this little film. So this is one of our factory workers, and Philippa was a retired flower maker, but she came and joined us in this project so that she could show us how to make flowers. But also, one of the lasting legacies she left for us was that she said, people really like this. Maybe this will take off again. So it was that sense of interaction, not only from the public, but also from the people who were on the project and making the project. And it was a real privilege to be able to work with such skilled people. So at this point, you're wondering how I can be an artist, because I ask lots of other people to make my work. It's really important that I do. So some of the histories I step into are not my histories. So it's really important that I hand the voice and the authorship back to the people who make those histories. So as much as this, The Factory by Clare Twomey, was a piece of work made by me, we've tried relentlessly to make sure that we credit and we acknowledge everybody who's helped on those projects. And then this is my last slide. So this I'm really proud of. It's a series of programs that is on iPlayer, and it's Culture in Quarantine. And I think it's a really nice way to finish the talk, because here I don't work with clay, I work with marzipan. And so I was honoured to be in the huge list of wonderful people like Anthony Gormley, Jules Holland, and all the other makers. There are 9 films there in total. But it's about how we translate. And I think translating now is a really important thing that we do. So I think that I told you a mind-bogglingly huge amount of stuff. So I will stop sharing my window, and then maybe we can hand over to Anne Elizabeth and Sam, who might be able to help us with some questions.
Thanks for that, Claire. We'll now have some questions from me and Anne, along with any that have been submitted into the Q&A tab below. And if you have any questions, then please feel free to ask them through the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. And to kick things off, so Claire, what inspired you or drove you to explore and include human interactions within your work, such as consciousness and conscience?
I think from a very young age, I grew up in Suffolk, but I was brought to London. So it was like a really focused, kind of a special invitation when I took to museums. And so in the museums, I was constantly struck how there were piles of objects there. But actually, and it may be because my mother, who was a seamstress, took me to the textiles a lot, but I kind of felt like the objects were telling my stories somehow, or I recognized them. And so I think when I'd finished my bachelor's and went on to do my master's, and then I went into a studio, I kind of felt like there were stories to tell and to invite other people's voices in. And so you're right, Sam, in the early days, that was a rare and strange thing to do. But now it seems that we're in a place where that's much more welcomed.
Hi, Claire. Out of all your installations, which one was most personal to you?
Oh, Annie, that's such a difficult question. Maybe I haven't made that one yet. I think in a way, all of the works are super personal. You don't make work that requires this much effort if you don't care about it, if it hasn't struck a chord. The works that I make have to stand up and be independent. So they tend to look like they've stepped away from me to be able to be their own and to be independent. There are so many privileges that I've had, but I think that the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, the reason that I think that's my favorite is because I felt like I was holding something so fragile that Nisad, the death camp survivor that I worked with, he trusted me. And so I answered that question from an emotive stance. You know, if you ask me what my most exhilarating, biggest sculpture was, that would be different. But in a way, they're all super personal. But that one, that felt like I was holding an awful lot in my hands at the time.
Thank you.
And now we have one from the chat, from Hayley Haberfield, asking, of all the materials you could have picked, why did you pick clay?
Oh, that's such a good question. Hayley, thank you very much. I thought I was going to be a painter. I really, really thought I was going to be a painter. I went to Edinburgh, which is an awfully long way from Suffolk, because I thought I was going to be a painter. So I could start my degree by doing half painting and half ceramics. But I think I really love ceramics because of its chameleon-like nature, because of the amount of things it can give back to you, because of its ability to be so many things. If you were writing magic, clay would be at the heart of it somewhere, wouldn't it? It's always undergoing transformation.
A question from Georgia Mackey. As an artist, do you prefer to revisit certain elements in earlier works, or do you prefer to stay contemporary and start a new chapter in the pieces that you do?
It's really interesting because I think that I don't think you ever finish a piece of work. You know, it might go live, and usually it's when my projects go live where they begin, because everything else is staging, everything else is preparation, everything else is because they are made so that the visitor steps inside the artwork somehow. So I kind of feel there are different strands to the works that I've made. I've asked really big questions like, will people be able to withstand the pressure of taking something from a museum? Will they contribute to things? So I think I have a series of larger questions, and I don't think they're answered. So in a way, the questions carry on. What I do try to do, and it's quite a battle, is when somebody gets in touch and they say, will you make trophy again? And I have to say no, because that was made for the Victoria and Albert Museum, and it was a very, very special moment in time. So usually there's a connecting point. There has to be, because I'm just one person, and these are all personal responses to places. So I try to continue, and it's definitely my mantra at the moment is I shall, and I'll try and keep making new work. Really important.
Great, thanks. And now a question from me. So you mentioned that you attended Edinburgh College of Art. I was just wondering what, if anything, drew you here over other universities?
It's an interesting question. I think you have to bear in mind that I went to university just over 25 years ago. So I'm the generation that got a grant. Yeah, so I really want you to hear that with my answer, okay? Because it's not possible a lot of the time now to travel when you go to university. But it was my chance to do something I'd never done before. So I don't think I'd ever even been to Scotland before I went to look at the art college there. So my choice was, the course was amazing. I'd also been offered an extremely wonderful place in London. But I said no to the London experience because I felt it was there waiting for me, and I truly love London. So I went to Edinburgh because I couldn't think of another reason I might ever be living there. So it was extraordinary. And I think it made my learning experience amazing, to be afresh, to be anew, to be somewhere completely different.
A question from me, Claire. What makes clay/ceramics more interesting than any other art medium?
Thanks, Annie. That's a great question. I kind of got, there's a really interesting example of that. And it does take me back to Edinburgh, actually. I remember, you know, when we're learning all those skills of how do you roll out a piece of clay, what does porcelain do, all of those fundamental questions. Then about 2 years ago, I made a project for the Welbeck estate, which is, it was telling the stories of the Dukeries, which is this incredible set of private estates that run kind of Nottingham and across, we should say. And from Germany, I was able to find this new ceramic material. And it was incredible. It was like the thickness of a piece of paper. It was pure porcelain. And I printed portraits on. And you could only see the picture when you held it up to the light. Excuse me. So in a way, like we think of clay as being stuck. It's a material that only does one thing. Actually, it progresses as we progress. And it's really interesting to see the change in technologies that happens to clays. But also, I'm a really big fan of how it communicates, because it is so common. The thing that other artists battle, I embrace. I like the fact that it's such a normal material to us all.
Great, thanks, Katie. Sorry, Claire. And here we have another question from Matt Muldoon asking, in trophy, why was the bluebird chosen?
That's a really good question. I'm so sorry that I didn't make that clear. It kind of seems obvious to me now that I didn't say much about that. But when I was given the invitation to make something, and it was horrendously open, make something for the V&A. It's like the biggest opportunity I've ever had. And it was make something, you're like, oh my goodness, where do you start with this? So in a way, the V&A ceramic galleries were shut at the time because somebody had stolen an object from the V&A. So the ceramic galleries were shut, and that's when I was invited in. And so I wanted to talk about things that belong in museums, and certainly, or don't belong in museums. So certainly when we look at the decolonizing museums agenda that is with us and should be with us now, then in a way Trophy was addressing that by saying, you can steal something from a museum, as many things have also been transported across the world that maybe they shouldn't have done to sit in our museums. The reason that it was a bird was that I had this idea that I wanted to make something so big and so beautiful that no one could resist it. So the bird was a really charming and beautiful motif that you could hold it in your hand and you could walk away. We made it, so these little birds, and the idea that the bird has freedom and it could have left. There's all these different fantasies set up as we laid Trophy out. But also one of the important things was working with Wedgwood. And when Wedgwood said they would be a partner with me on this project, it was really important because it added historical value to these birds. So the bird is a beautiful idea that they've landed in the museum and they're with us. It's extraordinary. How are they here? What are they doing? But then for them to be made of this historic and highly valued material made it really impossible for people not to take them. So there were lots of layered reasons, but the bird was really a motif that talked about freedom and flight locked inside this museum.
A question from Caroline Lewis. Were there any spares made for the 10,000 bowl project, or was it important to only make 10,000? And if so, was there a fear that the project would feel changed by possibly losing one when they were being installed?
It's a good question. There was, I think there were more than 10,000. You can never make less, can you? And the 10,000 hours is based on an apprenticeship. The idea that an apprenticeship takes about 7 years. And if you break down the original idea of the apprenticeship, which is around 7 years, then that breaks down into about 10,000 hours. And so the 10,000 hours, 10,000 bowls, it seemed like that should be the thing that we make. Probably on an apprenticeship, you probably make a few more mistakes, you make a few more things. So we had a few mistakes and we had a few broken things. But on any installation of that scale, we try to break things first. So the people you saw helping me install, it was really important that they did break something actually before we began, because then that helps everybody to say, okay, that's what can happen. And we know it's okay, it's not the end of the world. So we always make a little bit too much. So it allows us to install, because I probably made everything look really easy, but it's hard work. And you've got to carry a really incredible team of generous people with you. So we broke a few, some intentionally, some not. But I think we could say 10,000 or maybe 100 more, who knows?
And now a question from myself. What advice would you give to your 17-year-old self?
Oh, I wish I knew that question was coming. God, that's tricky. Actually, I tell you what, it's what David Buckland said to me, and he runs an organisation called Cape Farewell that places artists, and he's been running Cape Farewell for like over 15 years. And I had the pleasure of meeting him, the Eden Project, when we placed 10,000 flowers there to dissolve into the ground. And actually, once we were in a conversation, and he said to me, be brave. And it was quite a recent conversation. So I think that's what I would say to my 17-year-old self is be brave. And I would encourage all of you to do so. It's one of the best things to remember that.
I have a question for you, Claire. You mentioned that you have a project going on at the moment that comes out in October. Do you have any idea what you would like to do afterwards?
Oh, that's a good question. So during this period, I've been thinking a lot, and I've been working a lot, and I've had the opportunity to think about things quite differently. So it's an exciting time, and that little mantra, be brave, ticks on, you know. I think that the projects that I'm looking forward to doing are ones that instigate more than one site working together at the same time. I'm really interested in the projects that I've done. They've been large monumental projects that happen one at a time. I'm really, really interested in what happens when we get 3 sites working together. Can we get those communities, those artworks, to share their understandings of what they are? So yeah, I think that the way that I'm thinking about the future is how we connect. And how we connect through art, which is really important, because art affords us the ability to connect in quite different ways to other, maybe more dictatorial ways. It allows people in and it gives voice. And so I'm really, really interested in that possibility.
And now we have a question from Georgia Mackey asking, What role do ceramics have in the 2020 world?
Well, as every good hairdresser says, you always need cups and saucers. So there's like a really straightforward answer to that, isn't there? You know, it's an interesting question if you hold that up against our environmental concerns. So it's really important to look at the energy that it takes to make something like this. How many trees, how much materials, how much mining, how many resources, in comparison to throwaway items or disposable items or plastic items. But I kind of feel like ceramic wins out in terms of, and the reason I'm talking cups and saucers is just an easy way to talk about material value. So in terms of ecology, I think we've got a really strong argument. If you go home and you rattle around in the back of your cupboards, you're going to find a great-grandmother's something in there, you know. It stays with us and it's humane. It tells our stories, which is really important. To answer that in other ways, then clay is really important in terms of land mass and what we're doing with it, how we build dams, how we work with ecology in other ways. In terms of the very brilliant world of art practice, it feels like clay is only just finding its feet. And I say that after the dawn of time. You know, this material is accessible and it reads us as much as we read it. So I think that clay is very much part of our future. And one of our big battles is to make sure that stays accessible, that anyone can use it. And that's one of our big battles as we go forward in education, is that to afford more people more access to materials, and clay is an easy one to do.
Thank you, Claire. We have a question from Joe Spence. Have you a project in mind which is or will be a direct response to the COVID-19 / lockdown to COVID-19?
Yes. Yeah, it might take a while to come out. I'm a slow burner, so I haven't been able to. Well, I suppose that it. The project which I'm working on, which is what you saw actually in the studio, is those large drawings, and it's all about attention, how we pay attention. So at the moment in the studio, I'm making some porcelain chalk, and I'm working on 100 slate drawings, which are about this beautiful porcelain material drawing upon slate, and recognizing through tiny, tiny, tiny marks how we continue to pay attention, how we continue to care. And alongside that, we'll go 100 letters as well. So it's taking a long time, but I'm really enjoying the time it's taking to make it. And it feels like a clay project because of the porcelain, that relationship to how all of our material worlds are layered upon each other. So that'll be out 2021, I reckon. Annie, I can't hear you, I'm afraid.
What other artists have directly influenced your work? Question from Hayley Haberfield.
That's a really, really, really good question. It sounds like there's a helicopter landing somewhere near the Tate Modern at the moment. I hope that's not interfering things too much. I hope you can still hear me. It's interesting because last year, my life story was recorded for the British Library as part of the Oral History Projects and collecting artists' voices. And they asked me a lot about this. And a lot of the time, I was curious that means different things to me at different times. And I think it's got to go back to that call of be brave. So when I was at art college, then Robert Rauschenberg was my absolute hero. And I love his paintings. But actually, I was reading his biography of the barriers, the boundaries, how brave and courageous he was. That was really, for me, so important that I read that at that time. And then, of course, Cornelia Parker, you know, the first installation artist, possibly, you know, her use of materials, her willingness to speak with her own voice was really, really important to me. And there are probably a million others. I mean, it's been really interesting working with the Art Fund on the Derek Jarman project, because again, it just comes back to those artists who were willing to take the risk and dig in and make the things they felt needed making in the world. So it's not a bad list. Possibly I could do with one more woman on that list.
And one last question, Claire. Do collaborative works with the public ever go not as planned?
Oh, that is such a good question. And that almost feels like a theatre question, you know, never work with children or animals, right? We test things relentlessly. You know, there aren't many projects that make it out of the studio in under 2 to 3 years. You know, we really, really try to understand the questions we're asking and what can go wrong. But I do believe, Annie, that things don't go wrong. They reflect what you've placed in front of people, and you have to be prepared to hear the truth from what you've made. So a lot of the time you might make something, put it in the world, and there's some complaints that, oh, nobody gets it. And maybe it's because you haven't got to the point of the dialogue that it should have been published. In a way, by the time we get things out in the world, we are willing to accept what the work does. And I think that's really important. It sounds like I'm skirting the issues, but really I'm not. If you can hear this and stay open to my reply, it'll serve you 10 times over in many ways. But I can tell you a hilarious story of things going wrong, if you need one. It was at the Victoria and Albert Museum, and towards the end of the project being live for 5 hours, there was a particular gentleman who was stuffing his pockets completely full of bluebirds, front pockets, back pockets. He was just spiky with little bluebird tails. There were so many. And so there were lots of assistants working the space, and they politely said, could you leave some for other people, sir, etc., etc. But he didn't, and he left. And I think in a way that was his response. I just really hope he never fell over, because he would have got really hurt with all those birds stuffed in his pockets. So in a way, I think it's the kind of duty to your work to accept what it does.
Well, Claire, I'd just like to say thank you so much for hosting this talk, and it was a great opportunity to learn about you and a bit more about your work.
Annie and Sam, I want to thank you so much for your fantastic questions, and everybody who's put questions into the little question area today, and it's just been a huge pleasure. Thanks so much for the opportunity.